what area of the brewery is this?
The brew house.
Is Anchor Steam a craft beer?
Yes, it is. Anchor Steam's the first craft beer.
The first?
Yeah.
When did it become the first craft beer?
Anchor was a small, struggling brewery that started in the 1860s, and new owners bought it in 1896 and changed the name to Anchor. And Anchor was always a small brewery, but by the 1950s or 60s, when the large national breweries really started to expand and American tastes ran towards light lager beer, Anchor really fell on hard times. It was set to go out of business in 1965, and a man named Fritz Maytag bought the brewery for very little money and set about trying to modernize it somewhat. Part of the problem with the brewery was that it was very antiquated and made very inconsistent beer. And so his revival of Anchor Steam beer in 1965 moving on was really the first craft beer, but then especially in the 70s. In 1973, he started making Anchor Porter, which was a real dark beer, and the first porter being made, traditional porter. And then in 1975, he made the first IPA, the first barley wine, and he started making a seasonal Christmas ale. So that was the beginning of craft beer in the United States as we know it now.
So you are responsible for the brewing beer culture in the United States?
Well, I was in high school then, so no.
Or the company, the company that you're a part of was responsible?
Very much so.
And what now sets you apart from other craft beers?
Well, you know, that sense of tradition, that Anchor was here doing it before it was popular and before anyone else was doing it. And part of the thing that set Anchor apart from the beginning, and part of the thing about craft beer, is using traditional brewing techniques and high quality ingredients, and at times making very traditional beers, but also using traditional styles as a starting point and then adding to it and improvising with it.
So that's what sets Anchor apart in terms of beer. From what I understand though, you're actually more involved with the spirits and the hard alcohols. What is unique about Anchor in their distilling?
Well, Anchor opened a distillery here at the brewery in the same building in 1993. And at that time, American whiskey was all made by a handful of really large companies. And almost all of the American whiskey was bourbon. But the original American whiskey was rye whiskey. And up until Prohibition, rye whiskey was the most popular style of whiskey in the United States. After Prohibition, and especially starting around World War II, the popularity of rye whiskey diminished and bourbon became more popular until, you know, the 1980s, 1990s. There was no interest at all in rye whiskey. Now, this was something else that Fritz Maytag brought to, you know, to craft distilling, was that, you know, for Americans to kind of re-examine their interest in rye whiskey and to make it popular again. So not only did he do that, but he was making rye whiskey in copper pot stills the old traditional way instead of big factory type distilleries. So now rye whiskey has become very popular again, and it still doesn't sell as much as bourbon, but there's great interest in it, which started with Anchor distilling rye whiskey in 1993, or started to.
Jocelyn.
Can you talk about when you first started here and how your role has changed from then to now, and what you were doing then, and what you like about?
Well, I started here. This is really the only real job I've had. I was just out of college, and I worked briefly at another job, which, you know, I was kind of trying to see what I was going to do next. All my friends were going off to graduate school, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And through a friend, I got a job here at Anchor. But at the time, Anchor was really small. There were 13 employees. But I thought I would just, it was like an entry-level job, working like on the bottling line. And I thought that I would work here for, you know, a few months, and then I'd go off and do something else. But when I started working here, even after a few weeks, I could see that it was a real good group of people, and they were all really passionate about what they were doing, and they kind of had kind of a mindset that they were going to take over the world. And at the time, there were just a couple other craft brewers in the whole country. Sierra Nevada hadn't opened yet. They sold their first beer the following year in 1981, and it just seemed like a very exciting place to be. And one of the big advantages then was, because the brewery was so small, that once you started working here, if you proved to be competent and hardworking, you quickly got a chance to learn a lot of different things. And as we've grown, now we have over 200 employees. As we've grown, naturally people have to be a lot more specialized in what they do. But at that point, when we only had 13 employees, it was great, because you came in, and within a few months of starting to work here, you were learning all kinds of things. So I don't know if that answers the question. I don't remember what the original question was at this point, but I kind of forgot. I went off.
What kinds of things were you learning?
Well, the first thing was packaging. It was bottling and filling kegs, but then the next thing was starting to do some cellar work. So it's like fermentation and yeast handling, and then it grows from there into brewing and the other areas of the brewery.
Go in front of it and act excited.
All right, well, this isn't where the magic happens. This is where we check to make sure the magic is happening.
Some refer to this as the lab.
It is the lab.
Well, that's why some people refer to it as that.
All right. The liquid that's made in the brew house is called wort, which, like a lot of things in brewing, is a German word. The cooled wort is transferred to these fermenters, and then yeast is added. And it ferments in these open fermenters for about 3 days.
What stage is this on?
This one is at the end of fermentation, and it'll be transferred to the cellar tomorrow morning. So you can see, like, when fermentation is active, there's the foam on top of it, because the yeast is actively creating carbon dioxide. But as the yeast starts to slow down, it drops out of solution, and it's not working much anymore. So after it's fully fermented, this is transferred to closed tanks in the cellar, and then it's aged. So most of the alcohol is made already, but it still doesn't taste that great. The aging improves the flavor. You asked earlier what was one of the things that's unique about Anchor we use whole hops just as they're picked. The hop plant is a real tall vine, and the whole thing's cut down when they're harvested. And the part that's used for brewing are the flowers. And all that's done to these flowers, these little hop cones, is they're picked, they're dried, and they're packed in bales. And so these bales hold about 200 pounds of hops.
Do you know that still, so I can get like
This?
real
Yes.
focus? Maybe the other hand. Let me get the full.
Okay. And so the reason this flower is flat is because it's been packed into a bale. But before it's dried and when it's on the vine, it looks more like that, but better.
Yeah, less dead. Is that cool?
So I don't know if you want to just get like, but these tanks down here are it's the tanks where the beer ages. So after it ferments in the open fermenters, then it's transferred to these closed tanks and it ages. And so most of our beer is roughly a month from brewing to being ready to bottle, be put in bottles or kegs. And the majority of that time is spent down here. So this little thing over here is a can filling line. And on this side is the main bottle filling line. And you can see the bottle filling line is much larger. The machine over in the corner is the filler, and then this one right here is the labeler. And those are the two important, most important pieces of equipment on the bottling line. This bottling line is where we do all of our 12-ounce bottles, and we fill about 420 bottles per minute. And it's running.
What machine at the brewery do you feel the most attached to?
The stalls.
So,
Well, it's not really a machine. It's got a lot of moving parts.
is it like the son you always wanted?
Yeah, it can't talk. So this is the end of the bottling line where the bottles are put on and the full cases come off, and then all these pallets are beer that is the beer that we ship out.
So this is what you were referring to when you said you would want something as a son? Or were you referring to the large? This is the machine that you'd want as a son.
That one, yeah, I'll take that one.
Instead of the human boy.
Yeah.
Okay. Smelled it. Ooh, be careful, be careful. Smell this.
Oh, it smells good.
Yeah. It's Hirsch bourbon, 46% alcoholic content.
Oh.
I know that off the top of my head. This is a well-aged coffee that I think
is there still coffee in there?
was here when we got here. This Hirsch smells good. I don't know what this is. What's this? That doesn't look like a finished product. Can I smell it?
It's an experiment, yes. It's light because it's in,
Oh, so this is a whiskey.
it's distilled
Smells like whiskey.
Christmas Eve.
Distilled Christmas.
Let Jocelyn smell it if she'd like.
Okay. Oh.
But it's
Good.
it's an experiment.
I mean, the alcohol content's pretty high though, isn't it?
Yes.
So how is it like at Christmas though?
Well, it's distilled. It was a finished beer that then went through the stills, and then it's been in barrels.
Oh, it's old. Cool.
Hey,
What's this?
it's Kinder's avocado. Put it back. Okay.
Is it experimental?
In a few more days.
Okay.
Your